The Mishnah continues and speaks about the Musaf now. Uva Musafin on days during the Musaf sacrifice, which means days that they would bring the Musaf. So at the Musafim, Hayom Sifan Oitesha, there was another 9 tekiyos, which were blown. And again, they would sing and they would blow these 9 blowings, again, tekiah, trua, tekiah. And it would ultimately be, instead of 21, on a day with Musaf, like Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, Yontiv, so you would have an extra 9. So how many does that equal? 21 plus 9 is 30. And then over Erev Shabbos, what about on a Friday? There was another 6 blows. Hayom Sifin Sheish, they would do another 6. Shalosh lahabdil as ha'ami malacha. They would do 3 to stop people from doing the work, which in the Gemara in Shabbos talks about it more in detail, and what each one, each of these blows, what it would, who was it meant for? They should leave the fields. They should close their stores. They should take their kedeiros, their pots, off the stove, and they should cover them with some type of towel or something if they planned on leaving it out and keeping the heat, and reminding them to light candles. And then they would wait, and then they would do another 3, and to get people, to have people stop doing work. And that is, interestingly, Rashi mentions that they would, the Gemara says, lahavdil ben kodesh l'choil, to separate. They would blow 3 times to separate between kodesh and choil, meaning between the holy and the weekday, which means that the day is becoming holy and you got to stop doing work. It's now night. Rashi adds that it's chiyuv skila. Now there's going to be a chiyuv skila. You're going to have a penalty of, which was this week's parsha actually, that the makoshesh eitzim was chayiv skila. The person who gathered the wood, he was chayiv. That was this week's parsha. That is that they would make sure to blow the trumpets to tell people, guess what? This is the cutoff time. You're now going to be chayiv skila if you do malacha. Now the commentaries all ask on that Rashi. Why does Rashi mention that there's a chayiv skila now? Should say now it's prohibited to work, but you're not really chayiv skila right when it's prohibited to do work. You really have to stop doing work a little before the 3 stars come out. 3 stars come out, yeah, that's the chayiv skila, because that's for sure night. But beforehand, you're already prohibited to do work, and they were obviously blowing the trumpets before that to tell people to stop doing work. They weren't blowing the trumpets on Shabbos after Shkia, after sunset. They were blowing the trumpets before. So it's interesting that Rashi adds in this idea of the chiyuv skila. Some take it out because it seems surprising. Rashi would say now people should know that now they're going to be chayiv skila. Now they're going to get the penalty of stoning if they do work. It's not really so. The penalty of stoning doesn't kick in until later on after stars come out, after it's definite night. When it's only a suffix night, you can't do work, but it's not a chayiv skila. But okay, anyway, so the Mishnah mentions another 6. So what does this mean? That if you have musaf and it's on a Friday, and let's say it's Rosh Chodesh, and it's Erev Shabbos, let's say Rosh Chodesh falls on a Friday, which is actually this week. I'm going to have, Thursday and Friday, I think, is Rosh Chodesh. So on Friday, how many blows would they blow if the Beis Hashem, the Beis Hamikdash, will be rebuilt? So you're going to have the 21 of a regular day. You're going to have Rosh Chodesh. You're going to have an extra 9 because there's a Musaf on Friday. And you're going to have an extra 6 to get people to stop doing the work, all different stages on Friday of people should come in from the fields. People should stop, close their shops. And ultimately 6 blows, 3 plus 3 comes 6. So it's altogether, what is that? 21 plus 9 plus 6 is 36. Then comes Erev Shabbos, Shabbosoy Chachag. Now, what about on Friday? That's during Sukkot. So you also have the water libation ceremony. So how many are you going to have on a day that has also the water libation ceremony? And you have Musaf, because it's Yantiv, it's Cholamayid, and you're going to have it's Erev Shabbos. It's a Friday. So you're going to have an extra 6, and then you're going to have extra for the water libation. So on the without the water libation, we already came up with 36 blows. And now we're going to see there's an extra 12, comes to 48. How do you have that? So it says, Hayusham, Erev Shabbos, Hayusham Arboim Ushmaina. There was 48 on this Friday, this specific Friday that fell on Sukkot, Cholamayid Sukkot. You're going to have 48. Shalosh l'psichas sha'arim. So it goes through all of them. You have the first 3, the psichas sha'arim, the opening of the gates that was done every day, that was done on a regular day, psichas sha'arim. And there were 7 gates, and then you had Shalosh l'Shar ha'elyon, and then you had the 3, which is the Shar ha'elyon. That's the Shar ha'elyon, the Nicanor gate that was that they said Kara hagever tiku v'hariu v'tiku. They would announce that they're starting the ceremony, and this is the water libation ceremony, and they would open the gate, the Shar Nicanor, which basically means there's 2 parts to this over here. There's number 1, there's the opening of all the gates, or 6 out of the 7 gates, and then you had after that was the first, that was 3 blows, and then you had the Shar ha'elyon, which is the Shar Nicanor, which is Kara hagever toku v'ariu v'toku. They would blow to announce the starting of the service of the water libations. In other words, they're going to be walking down through the women's section to get the water. So that's the Shar ha'elyon, is another term for Shar Nicanor. Now I'm just looking back now over here. If we look back on Nun Aleph Amud Beis, so it mentioned over there that the 2 kohanim would stand by the Shar ha'elyon in Shtei Chatzotzos b'yadeihen Kara hagever tikul v'hariu v'tikul. So it says that they would announce that their Kara hagever. This was the mamuna, the person in charge, would scream Imdu kayanim la'avodaschem, and just one second. This was a sign that it was time to go get the water. This was the time. So in other words, this on page 51b, they didn't open all the gates. This was the announcement to open the gate of the Shar Nicanor. The other gates were actually opened a little before this, a little before the Kara hagever. The other gates were opened, and that's what it means when it says that it's 3 for psichas sha'arim are the other gates. In the then came, that was the regular daily opening of the 6 gates. And then comes the Shar ha'elyon, the Shar Nicanor, which was specifically connected with the water libation. That's another 3. So far we have 6. We have the regular opening of the gates that was done by the on a regular day. Then you have the opening of the gate Shar Nikner, which was a gate the gate that was in between the Israelite Azara, and the women Azara, the women's section. That was called the Shar Nikner, Shara Elyon. So that was open. That's another 3 blows of Tekiah, Trua Tekiah. And the Shalosh and 3 Lashara Tachtoin, 3 that would be when they would go down the steps and they would open the entrance outside to the mountain where the Beis Hamikdash was. So those where they would get down the steps and start walking, and they had a long blowing that lasted as long as they walked to the entrance. Now we are skipping one of the blows that we mentioned earlier on page 51b. What are we skipping here? We're skipping the one that was done on the 10th step. We are not mentioning that one. We're leaving that out. And the Gemara is going to tell us that it's the reason why it's left out is because this opinion follows another view that they did 3 later on the Mizbeach, where they would like this opinion follows a different understanding. The one on 51b was an understanding that they would have a blowing on the 10th step. In this opinion on page 53b is a different opinion, and it holds they didn't do the blowing on the 10th step, but they made up for it with a different blowing, which we'll see. It's called Al Gabe Mizbeach. We'll soon see what that means. So we're skipping the 10th step. So we've got 3 opening the 6 gates, then another 3 opening the 7th gate, which is the Shar Nikner, Shar Elyon, and then another 3 for the Shar Tachtoin, which means when they would get down the stairs to the women's section, they would blow another 3, and they would walk while they're blowing until they reach the gate called the Shara Tachtoin, which is that gate that left the Ezras Nashim, the women's section, to the mountain that the Beis Hamikdash is on. And then they would have Shalosh Lemiloi Hamayim. Then they would have another 3. That was the Mishnah we saw on page 48. That was when they would fill the water and enter the Shar Hamayim, the gate of water. So that was another 3. They would enter the Beis Hamikdash and they would blow the trumpets. So how many 3s so far? So we've got 6 gates, the 7th gate, the outer gate, and the Miloi Hamayim. We got 4 groups of 3. That's 12 so far. V'shalosh al gabe mizbeach, and 3 on top of the mizbeach. This is the questionable blowing, because according to the Mishnah on 51b, you didn't do this blowing. You really did the blowing on the 10th step. This additional blowing that we're mentioning, which makes it so far 15 blows. It's questionable if this was done now or if it was done on the 10th step. But this Mishnah says it was done now, 3 on the Mizbeach. Rashi tells us, what does this mean? It was Legabe Mizbeach. It means that they would stand the Aravais up, which we learned about when they're in Perek Lulav and Arava. We learned about this, that they would stand the Aravais up by the Mizbeach. And when they did that, they would blow the trumpets, according to this opinion. Tekiah, Trua Tekiah. So far we got 15. And then, of course, you have the regular blowings, which is the 9 for Teisha, L'Tamid Shal Shachar, Teisha, L'Tamid Shal Bein Arba'im, Teisha, L'Musafin. And you had all 3 for the morning Tamid regular sacrifice, the afternoon regular sacrifice, and the Musaf sacrifice. That's 27. So we got 15 plus 27. 15 and 27 is 37, and then 42. So far we got 42. And then we've got 6. Shalish lahavdil asamim melacha v'shalish lahavdil beikodesh l'chol. So we got the 6 for Erev Shabbos, which the first 3 were separating people from their work, and the other 3 were to tell people that it's Shabbos is it's right here, right coming right in. So this altogether equals 48. So again, the Mishnah adds it all up, but just to make it simple, let me just let me just say one thing, and that is that if you want to understand the numbers, it's basically the 36 that we have on a regular day with Musaf in Erev Shabbos. We calculated 36, and we're going to add an extra 12. There's another 4 groups of 3. And when the Mishnah adds it all together, it starts out with 5 groups of 3. Why 5 groups of 3? Because one of those groups of 3 is really part of the regular daily sacrifice. So it's really an additional 4 groups of 3, because the first one is really from a regular day. It's called Shalish L'Psichas Sha'arim, 3 that was done on a regular day called Psichas Sha'arim. They would open all the gates of the Azara. That is on a regular day. That was already counted. But then there's an additional 4 sets of 3, which means an additional 12 blows, and that was special for the water libation ceremony. And if you want to just review what were these extra 4 times, just to make it very clear, we've got the extra ones were the Shar Nikoner, which is also called Shar Elyon. We've got the Shar Tachton, which is also called Shar Hayitzia, which is basically they got to the floor of the women's section and they continued blowing until they got out the door, which is we call it the Shar Tachton. And then the Miloi Hamayim, which is after they drew the water and they brought it into the Beis Hamikdash. It's called the filling up of the water. They would enter the Beis Hamikdash with the water and they go into the Shar Hamayim, the gate of water. So we call it, the third one is Miloi Mayim. And then the fourth, the final one, which our Mishnah in page 53b is following, is when they would put up those Aravais, they would stand up the willows by the Mizbeach. There was another blowing, a set of 3 blowing. So those are the extra 4 sets of blowing. And if you want to follow the Mishnah on page 51b, the extra 4 sets of 3 would skip this Al Gabe Mizbeach one, which is the putting the willows by the Mizbeach, and instead they would add a group of 3 blows, which is when they would reach the 10th step. That's when they had this extra 3 blows. So now you have 4 groups of 3 that were added on to the 36 blows. Altogether, 48. Okay, now comes the Gemara. I hope that's clear. Now the Gemara says, Mas Nisan Deloy Reb Yehuda. The Mishnah doesn't go like Reb Yehuda. Now, what that means is that Reb Yehuda makes his calculation, and the rabbis in our Mishnah don't seem to use the same calculation. Not necessarily do they argue about the actual blows, but they call it a different number. As we'll see in the Gemara, they call it a different number because when they speak about tekiah, cherua, and tekiah, the set, they call that 1. And the rabbis call that 3. So when Rabbi Yehuda talks about his numbers are going, when he adds up his numbers are going to have a different number than the rabbis, even though they have the same amount of blows, but he categorizes them differently, and therefore he has a much smaller number, because every 3, according to Rabbi Yehuda, are just 1. So the Gemara says our Mishnah is calculating each one. It calls it 48. It must be because our Mishnah follows the rabbis who don't calculate it the same way as Rabbi Yehuda does, and Rabbi Yehuda would come up with a different number, even though they're blowing the same blows. The question is, how do you count it? How do you consider it? So the Mishnah doesn't go like Rabbi Yehuda, the Tanya, because it was taught in a brisa. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Peiches Leivches Misheva. Rabbi Yehuda says never do less than 7 on a regular day. V'hamoisif, and the most you do on, like what's the case where you have the most blows? It would be on Erev Shabbos on Chol Hamoed Sukkos. That would be the most blows that you would have on a day, which our Mishnah gave the number 48. Rabbi Yehuda says it's 16. And he says on a regular day is 7. Our Mishnah says 21. So we see that Rabbi Yehuda's combining them and calling them 7. We're calling it 21. Rabbi Yehuda's combining them and calling them 16 on a day on Pesach, on Sukkot, that's Erev Shabbos, and we're going to call it 48. So Rabbi Yehuda says, so we don't do more than 16 And the Gemara asks, "B'mai kol miflagi, what are they arguing about?" Rabbi Yehuda savar tekiya trua tekiya achasi. Rabbi Yehuda holds that when you blow a tekiya trua and tekiya, that's really one blow. That's one. It's considered one. Rabbanan savri tekiya l'chud trua l'chud. The rabbis hold that each one is counted individually, and that's how they have different numbers. Now the Gemara asks, "My time of Rabbi Yehuda, what's the reason of Rabbi Yehuda that he counts every three to be one?" So he says, "Amar kra tuskatim trua." It says in the pasuk tuskatim trua, you should blow a trua. It's interesting the wording here. He uses the word tekiya, blow, and then he uses the word trua. You should blow a trua. So Rabbi Yehuda is saying, you know what, that teaches us that it's really one. Now there's a question exactly the wording of this Gemara. So machlokes the Marshal and the Marsha, if you include these parentheses or not. I'm going to include them, and we can read the Gemara with the parentheses. Even though the Marshal takes it out, the Marshal keeps it in. So we're going to learn them. Uksiv, so it says uskatim truva. Now, this was in Parshas Baloischa. We just had it, and it talked about the trumpets, and make the two trumpets of silver, and they should be banged out. And it talked about gathering the kahal, or gathering the nesiim, or when we're leaving the travel, when we're traveling. So this was this was part of this was the purpose of the trumpets, was either three things. It was either to gather the congregation, or to gather the nesiim, the leaders, or to get everyone to start traveling. And depending on what the purpose was, it was a little, they sort of switched things. It was switched. In other words, they used two trumpets to gather the people. They used one trumpet to gather the nesiim. They did not blow a trua when they did these two things, but when they wanted the camps to start leaving and traveling, so then they would blow two trumpets with the trua, tekiya. So they would have a tekiya and a trua and a tekiya, and they would blow again to get the second the second camp to go and to start traveling the south. First they did the east, then the south. So ultimately they blew a tekiya, trua, tekiya for both of these, and that's what the psukim are talking about. So it says uskatim trua and uksiv, and it says trua yisku. So it says you should first tekiya, then trua. Then it says trua and then tekiya, and it puts them together and it mixes up the terminology. Haketzad, what does this teach us? Tekiya utrua achasi, alma terua hainu tekiya. We see here that tekiya, trua, and tekiya are really one. Again, it's a little unclear exactly the correct wording, because the Marshal takes out a few words, the Marsha adds in a few words, but ultimately what we're seeing, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, is that tekiya, trua, and tekiya are basically counted as one, and we put them all together. V'Rabbanan, and the rabbis, they argue on this concept, and they say each one is a separate entity. And the fact that it says terua, uskatem trua, and it says trua yisku, and it seems to put them together as if they're one thing, the rabbis say, no, it's not telling you it's one. It's telling you that every trua needs to be enveloped by a tekiya. Trua means the broken blast. A tekiya means a solid blast. Every terua, every broken, needs a solid before it and after it. And that's why it would say uskatem trua, and it would say trua yisku. Hahu lepshuta lefaneho ula achareho huda asa. That's coming to teach you the simple one before it and a simple one, a solid one after it. And ultimately you have tekiah, teruah, and tekiah. Rabbi Yehuda lefaneho ula achareho menale. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, how do you know that you have to have every trua has a tekiah before it and a tekiah after it? The Gemara says, Nafkale Mishenis, he learns it from the fact that it says that you should blow a second time. Uskatem trua shenis, that you should do it a second time. And that teaches us that it's meant that you should have a tekiah, teruah, and a tekiah, that you always have a teruah after a tekiah, and or I should say a tekiah before a teruah and a tekiah after a teruah. In other words, that you need to have both. It's not enough just to have one, teruah yisku or tekiah or uskatem teruah. In other words, the other psukim implied that teruah has a tekiah before, or it has a tekiah after. And here we're saying, no, it has to have, that it's both, that you need to have both, that it's, that you need one before it and one after it. Rabbanan my time, what's the reason of the rabbis that they would hold that it's not considered to be one, you have to have a tekiah before it and a tekiah after it? Why isn't it considered to be one mitzvah, one blow? So the Gemara says, because it says that there were times when they only did one and not the other. Like, for example, when they're gathering the group, they used both trumpets, but they did not do the teruah. They only did a tekiah. So you see, sometimes you didn't do the teruah. And if you think tekiah, teruah, achasi, tekiah and teruah is one, and it always goes together, and you count it as one. So Amar Rachmana Palga, the mitzvah of it, Palga loy of it, would the Torah tell you that half you should do and half you don't do? Does that make sense? That you would sometimes do only half? So therefore, it must be that each one is a mitzvah of its own. Each one is an entity of its own. And you sometimes do one, sometimes do the other, and each one is counted on its own. And that's how the rabbis understand it. And Rabbi Yehuda, what is Rabbi Yehuda going to do with this? Seems logical, what the rabbis say. That blowing is not because the Torah is telling you do half a mitzvah. That blowing is more of a symbol that you're supposed to gather together. It's a gathering, the people come together and to the oil mayed, and I need everyone to gather together. So that's just a symbol of gathering. That's not really that's not a mitzvah. It's not considered, it's not like telling people do a half a mitzvah. That's just a siman bi'alma. It's just a symbol to remind, a sign of how to get them to gather. And therefore, it's enough to just blow, even though you're not doing a trua. But really, whenever you do whenever you do the real blasts of mitzvahs, it's a tekiah, trua, tekiah. It all goes together. It's one, and that's it. Now, the Gemara says Rabbanon, and what do the rabbis say? Simnahu, you're right. It is a siman. It's a sign that we want, that Moshe wants everyone to gather together. V'rachmana shavya mitzvah, and the Torah makes it into a mitzvah that when you want to do that, you need to use this as a sign. And this is the sign, and this is a mitzvah. And even though it's only a tekiah without a trua, it's only a solid blast without a broken blast, and therefore it would be a proof, according to the rabbis, that you have solid blasts and it is considered an entity of its own. The Gemara asks, Kaman Ozla Hada Amar Rav Kahana. Who does it go like this that Rav Kahana says, Bain Tekiya Letrua V'loy Klum? Rav Kahana says there's no difference between there's no separation between the Tekiya and the Teruah. You're not allowed to have any separation. Who would follow? Who do you think follows that opinion? You're not allowed to separate or interrupt between the Tekiya and the Teruah. So the Gemara says, you know who probably goes like? Sounds like that's Rabbi Yehuda, because he holds it's one mitzvah, it's one entity, and you can't interrupt. Come on, Rabbi Yehuda, that boat goes like Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara asks, Pshita, of course it goes like Rabbi Yehuda. What are you even thinking? Obviously it goes like Rabbi Yehuda. It can't go like the rabbis. The rabbis hold that they're separate mitzvahs, separate entities. So obviously, you can interrupt. Rav Kahana says you can't interrupt. It must be Rav Yehuda's opinion. So the Gemara says no. Mahu de tema. You might have thought to say afilu karabonon, that even according to the rabbis, you can't interrupt. And this would mean that the rabbis, the way Rav Kahana is emphasizing this halacha, the way he's saying it, that you can't interrupt, and he's following the rabbis maybe. And the rabbis are telling us a very important, he's saying that even according to the rabbis, it might be separate mitzvahs, separate entities. Tekiya, Teruah, Tekiya are separate. Nevertheless, don't think that you can follow Rabbi Yochanan's leniency, that Rabbi Yochanan says, you know what? You could blow the 9 blows of Rosh Hashanah at 9 different hours. Blow one this hour, wait an hour, blow again, wait an hour, blow another blow. You do Tekiya at 9 o'clock. You do Teruah at 10 o'clock. You do Tekiya at 11, and so on and so forth. And you ultimately get Tekiya, Teruah, Tekiya, Tekiya, Teruah, Tekiya, Tekiya, Teruah, Tekiya, altogether 9 blasts. And how long does it take? 9 hours. You do one per hour. And according to him, according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's kosher. And the Rav Kahana says, no, the rabbis don't agree with that. The rabbis would hold you can't interrupt like that. You can interrupt a little, but you can't interrupt like that. I mean, it's considered 3 separate mitzvahs, but you can't do Rabbi Yochanan's type of interruption. I mean, that is way too much. And the reason being, because it's like a separate thing. It's like you didn't do the mitzvah. You did the blow and then you stopped. It's not connected. It doesn't connect. So the Gemara says maybe the Rav Kahana's statement can even fit with the rabbis. And what Rav Kahana is saying is that even the rabbis don't agree with Rabbi Yochanan. They follow a different type of view that you can't interrupt, and the understanding would be the amount of time that it would take to complete the entire blowing, that you can't interrupt. But to interrupt a little, that would be okay. It's 2 sets. It's a separate. They're separate mitzvahs, but you can't interrupt the amount of time. Like Rabbi Yochanan says, that more than it would take to finish the whole blowing, that you can't interrupt. Not like Rabbi Yochanan says. So it says, Rabbi Yochanan, Damar, Shama, Teisha, Tekiyos. That Rabbi Yochanan says, if you heard 9 blows that are B'Teisha, Shois, B'Yam, and 9 different hours of the day, Yotza, you fulfilled your obligation. So Rav Kahana comes along and says, no, you can't do that. You could interrupt amount of time, up to the amount of time that it would take to finish blowing, but you can't interrupt 9 hours. You can't interrupt. That would be, you wouldn't be Yitzchok. And that's what he's saying, that Rav Kahana says you're not supposed to interrupt between the Tekiya and the Teruah, and that would fit with the rabbis, because the rabbis hold the 2 separate, the separate entities, tekiah, trua, tekiah. But nevertheless, even though they're separate entities, nevertheless, you can't interrupt a crazy amount of time. So the Gemara says, Kamash Malon. So when our Gemara says that this fits with Reb, this follows Kaman Reb Yehuda, is coming and letting us hear that the Rav Kahana's opinion doesn't fit with the rabbis. It fits with Reb Yehuda, that you can't have a separation, interruption between the tekiah and the trua, and that follows Reb Yehuda. You could have thought that it follows the rabbis, but the conclusion is that it doesn't. Follows Reb Yehuda. The Gemara asks, but maybe it should also fit with the rabbis. Maybe it is following the rabbis, and you're not allowed to have a big interruption of an hour, maybe even a half hour, but you could have a small interruption, and that's what Rav Kahana is saying. And Rav Kahana will fit with the rabbis. We'd like it to be that way, that he fits with the rabbis, because then it would mean that his opinion might be the accepted view, and he's following an accepted view. Now he's not just going in one opinion. So the Gemara says, maybe we should say that it fits with the rabbis. And you could understand it that way, right? He says you shouldn't interrupt. And he means don't make big interruptions. So the Gemara says, no, it doesn't fit the wording. He says you shouldn't interrupt. He says, look at his wording. Rav Kahana says, he adds two words there. Those two words knock this whole thought off. It says, don't have any interruption at all. If he says you can't have any interruption at all, that's not the rabbis. That would fit with Rabbi Yehuda. The rabbis hold that two said they're different entities. You have a tekiah and you have a teruah. You have a solid blast, you have a broken blast. And so therefore, imke mahu beloy klum, what would it mean? Zero. Beloy klum, you shouldn't have zero type of interruption. And if that's so, it says the words you should have zero interruption. Therefore, Rav Kahana's opinion has to fit with the rabbis, with the Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda holds that tekiah, trua, tekiah are all one. It's one entity, and that would be the importance of not interrupting, because it's because this is one entity. Now, what comes out from what does Rav Kahana really mean? So there's a big debate among the Rishonim over here. This is a very practical halacha. When you blow tekiah, when you blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah, so the way we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, we blow not 9 blasts, we blow 30 blasts. We actually blow more, but the main mitzvah is 30 blasts. Why do we blow 30 blasts? Well, if you add it up, tekiah, shvarim, tekiah, we do 3 times, that's 9. Tekiah, teruah, tekiah 3 times, that's another 9. And then tekiah, shvarim, teruah, tekiah, we do 3 times, and that's 12. 9 plus 9 plus 12 equals 30. Why do we do 30? Our Gemara here basically says that all you need for Rosh Hashanah is really 9 blasts. And Rabbi Yochanan says if you did those 9 blasts in 9 different hours, you fulfilled the obligation. So sounds like all you need to blow is 9. Why do we blow 30? Because we don't know what the word trua means. Teruah might mean shvarim, teruah might mean teruah, and teruah might mean a combination of what? Shvarim, teruah. So because we don't know what it is, therefore we blow 30. But what we're fulfilling when we blow those 30 is one set. In other words, one of those sets we're fulfilling the mitzvah with. We don't need all 30. We just don't know which one is the ideal way to blow it, either the kosher way or the ideal way. So what we do is we blow 30, and we're fulfilling the mitzvah with 9. Now, Rabbi Yochanan is talking about in the time when, if they knew exactly how to blow it, you would blow 9. If you knew the correct way, or you followed one opinion, that you knew that you had a shita, you had an opinion of which one it is. What does trua mean? It might mean shvarim, or it might mean trua, or it might mean shvarim and trua, but you knew exactly what it is. So all you would need is 9 blows, and you fulfilled your obligation. And if you did it in 9 different hours, Rabbi Yochanan says that's also fine, because you could interrupt in between them.
Rabbi,
And yes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Why is all this in Gemara Sukkah instead of Gemara Rosh Hashanah?
So it's also in Rosh Hashanah, but it's here because we're talking about the blowing during the water libation ceremony. And we're talking
and
about
also what is chatzos rice? These are not the shofar. These are the question is, what's a trua?
We're touching on the Gemara Rosh Hashanah because we're talking about trua and interruptions and blowings. But you're right; it's not. We're really not dealing with even the shofar. We're really mainly dealing with the chatzos, with the trumpets. So it belongs here as well. How about that? Now, what I wanted to bring out is a very interesting question. The big question and this is really connected to this Gemara here, and it's practical. The practical side of blowing on Rosh Hashanah is that you have to learn the halachos of blowing. When you want to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, people think, "Oh, I'm just going to blow. What's the big deal? I'm blowing the shofar. However I blow it is good." No, there's a big question when you blow these tekiah, shvarim, trua, tekiah. So you're blowing a blow in the middle of your solid blasts, a combination of shvarim and trua. Now that combination of shvarim and trua, are you supposed to breathe in between those 2 blasts? Meaning you have the shvarim blast, do, 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 then take a breath, and then blow the trua, or are you not supposed to blow in between and you go do, 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 without breathing in between? And this is a big question, and it's talked about in Shulchan Aruch, and it's based on this Gemara here. How is it based on this Gemara? It's based on this Gemara because Rabbi Yehuda holds that you're supposed to blow tekiah, trua, tekiah as one. It's one entity. This one entity of tekiah, trua, tekiah that Rabbi Yehuda holds is one entity. We don't. We hold it's 3 entities. But we hold that the trua, if it means shvarim, trua combination, that would be one entity. So if Rabbi Yehuda holds you're not supposed to interrupt, even with breathing, in between tekiah, shvarim, tekiah, or we should say tekiah, trua, tekiah, if he holds you're not supposed to interrupt with breathing because it's one entity, so when we do our one entity shvarim, trua, we also shouldn't interrupt with breathing. However, if we do breathe, if Rabbi Yehuda holds you breathe in between, even though he holds they're one entity, tekiah, trua, tekiah is one entity, but you still should breathe in between, then we could hold that you breathe in between the shvarim trua on Rosh Hashanah. So it actually has a practical application. Now, the Gemara here is bringing Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana said that you're not supposed to have any interruption between tekiah and trua. You're not supposed to interrupt at all. And the question the Rishonim have, does he mean that you're not even supposed to breathe in between because it's one entity? Do, no breathing in between any of those blasts? Or does he mean you're not supposed to interrupt at all, but you do breathe because it's 3 separate blasts? So Rashi on the bottom says, V'loi klum, loi haya mafsik beinatayim ella kadei neshima. You only interrupt the amount of a breath. So the Rishonim debate over here, does this mean that you should have an interruption of a breath or not? And that would be a practical application. In other words, he says don't have any interruption. But what does he mean by that? We're going to stop here. We continue tomorrow, Bez Hashem. Sei gesund, everyone. Have a good